Have you ever sat in a room full of people you thought you loved, only to realize they are holding a meeting to decide how to dismantle your life? Picture being at a Sunday dinner in a multi-million-dollar estate in Morgantown, West Virginia. The sterling silver is gleaming, the red wine is poured, and your mother-in-law looks you right in the eye and tells you that her daughter is simply too tired to be a mother. She does not ask for a favor. She demands that you quit your job tomorrow morning to stay home and raise your sister-in-law newborn baby. You chuckle, assuming the absurd demand is a dry joke. You turn to your husband, the man who stood at an altar and promised to be your partner, expecting him to put a stop to the nonsense. Instead, he stares at his plate, refuses to meet your eyes, and says, "It is what family does." Before I reveal the one sentence I spoke that froze the entire dining room and exposed the reality of my marriage, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Revenge Order for more stories of survival and quiet retaliation. Tell me your age and where you are listening from today. I love seeing the variety of people tuning in from around the world. Now, let me take you back to that dining table and show you exactly how an entitled dynasty seals its own fate. The first hard freeze of the Appalachian winter was settling over the mountains. Inside the Roberts family estate, the dining room smelled of expensive pine garlands and roasted lamb. My name is Catherine Roberts. I'm 34 years old, exhausted from a grueling week at the corporate office, but skipping Sunday dinner with Liam family was never an option. Beatrice, my mother-in-law, sat at the head of the long mahogany table. She picked up a silver spoon and tapped it sharply against her crystal water goblet. The ringing sound cut right through the low hum of our polite conversation. The room fell dead silent. To her right sat Jessica, my 28-year-old sister-in-law, shifted in her chair, adjusting the collar of her silk blouse. She did not look like a woman drowning in postpartum exhaustion. She looked annoyed to be there. Her newborn son, Finn, was asleep upstairs under the watch of a hired evening nurse. Near her elbow, Jessica had carelessly tossed her $3,000 designer clutch. It rested inches from an open candle flame. Beatrice had to reach over and pull the leather bag away before it caught fire. Jessica did not even notice. She treated everything in her life with that same blind negligence. Jessica is feeling overwhelmed. Beatrice announced, her voice projecting across the room like a judge delivering a verdict. The transition to motherhood is taking a toll on her mental health. She has too much on her plate right now. I took a slow breath, letting the cool water wash down my throat, waiting to see how this pertained to Liam or me. That is why we came up with a solution. Beatrice continued, turning her sharp gaze directly onto me. "Catherine, you will hand in your 2 weeks' notice tomorrow. You do not have children of your own to worry about, and Jessica needs a dedicated full-time caretaker for Finn. It makes the most sense." My fingers tightened around the stem of my wine glass. I let out a genuine laugh. The sheer audacity of her command was staggering. I looked around the table, waiting for the punchline. No one smiled. Richard, my father-in-law, kept slicing his meat with precise, rhythmic motions. Jessica inspected her cuticle. Beatrice just stared at me, waiting for my compliance. The air in the room grew very thin. I turned to Liam. He ran a boutique wealth management firm downtown, always wearing custom Italian suits and projecting an image of fierce protection. I needed him to speak. I needed him to tell his mother that her demand was insane. Liam cleared his throat. He shifted his weight and found a spot on the oak floorboards to stare at. "Come on, Cat," he muttered, his tone low and patronizing. "It is what family does. Jessica is drowning. Besides, your compliance job is just staring at spreadsheets all day. You can take a few years off. We can afford it." A cold chill radiated from the base of my neck down to my fingertips. My own husband was offering my autonomy as a sacrifice to his sister. He was trivializing my career to appease his mother. They all thought I was a mid-level human resources clerk. I let Liam spin that narrative for years because his fragile ego could not handle being out-earned by his wife. None of them knew I was a senior compliance director for a global energy conglomerate. I did not yell. I did not throw my napkin onto the china plate. I placed my silver fork down. The quiet clink felt louder than thunder. "I am not a nanny," I said, keeping my voice smooth and level, "and I am certainly not quitting a career that pays me $450,000 a year." The rhythmic slicing of Richard's knife stopped. I looked directly at Liam, watching the color drain from his handsome face. "Your boutique firm has not closed a major client in 6 months, Liam. My spreadsheets pay the mortgage on our house. My spreadsheets cover the lease on your luxury SUV. If I quit my job tomorrow, you will be bankrupt by Christmas." The silence that followed was suffocating. I watched Liam's eyes dart toward his father, flashing with a desperate, frantic panic that went far beyond mere embarrassment. It was the look of a man who was hiding something much darker than a struggling business. The silence in the dining room hung so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. No one moved. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway and the faint crackle of the hearth fire. Beatrice sat with her mouth slightly parted. The matriarch of the Roberts family was not accustomed to being told no. Her entire social currency relied on blind obedience. She looked from me to her son, expecting Liam to correct my statement, to laugh it off as a hysterical exaggeration. Liam stared at the half-eaten roasted asparagus on his porcelain plate. His jaw worked tight, a visible pulse jumping near his temple. He did not look up. He did not dare contradict me, because he knew I possessed the bank statements to back up every single syllable. For 4 years, he played the role of the primary provider. He walked around our wealthy Morgantown suburb in tailored suits, attending Chamber of Commerce meetings and acting like a titan of local finance. The truth was, his boutique wealth management firm was bleeding capital. I paid for the tailored suits. I paid for the premium gas in his car. Richard cleared his throat, a deep rumbling sound designed to reestablish his authority. He owned a sprawling Appalachian commercial real estate portfolio and operated his family like a boardroom. Catherine, he started using that low warning tone he reserved for insubordinate tenants. "Let us not become hysterical. We are discussing Jessica and her well-being. Tossing around inflated numbers does not change the fact that your sister-in-law needs assistance." I turned my attention to the patriarch. "My numbers are not inflated," Richard I replied. "I am the senior compliance director for an energy conglomerate. I audit corporate ledgers that dwarf your entire real estate portfolio. I track every dime that moves through my household. If you would like, I can pull up the routing number for the country club dues I paid on Liam's behalf last Tuesday." Jessica scoffed, pulling her cashmere sweater tighter around her shoulders. "You are so cold, Kat. It is always about money with you. Finn is your nephew. Do you not have a maternal bone in your body?" I looked at Jessica, then down at the table. Moments before this ambush, Jessica had carelessly tossed her $3,000 leather clutch near the centerpiece. The open flame of a taper candle had licked the edge of the leather, leaving a faint black scorch mark before Beatrice snatched it away. Jessica had not even noticed the near disaster. She treated everything in her life with that same blind negligence. Valuable items, relationships, and now her own newborn son. She expected the world to constantly step in and save her from the consequences of her own carelessness. "I am not cold, Jessica," I said, standing up from my antique chair. "I simply refuse to be your safety net." I placed my linen napkin neatly beside my plate. I looked at Liam. "Are we leaving, or are you staying here to figure out how to pay your own car lease next month?" Liam shot up from his chair. His face was a dark, unhealthy shade of red. He offered his parents a frantic, disjointed apology, promising he would speak to me and fix this misunderstanding. He grabbed my elbow, steering me toward the grand entryway. I let him guide me, keeping my posture straight and my chin elevated. We walked out the heavy oak front doors into the freezing Appalachian night. The first snow of the season was beginning to fall, dusting the pristine lawn in a layer of frost. The interior of Liam-leased luxury SUV was quiet for exactly 3 minutes. As we navigated the winding, tree-lined roads away from the estate, the heater blasted warm air against my frozen fingers. Then the gaslighting began. "What is wrong with you?" Liam demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and wounded pride. "How could you humiliate me in front of my father like that?" "You humiliated yourself when you offered my career as a sacrifice to your sister." I countered, staring out the passenger window at the passing pines. "You are overreacting," he insisted, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned pale. "My mother was just floating an idea. Jessica is struggling, and let us be honest, Kat, your job is just running compliance spreadsheets. You make a good salary, sure, but you are not curing diseases. You could step back for a year. We could restructure." I listened to him reduce a decade of my grueling corporate advancement to just running spreadsheets. He truly believed my work was a trivial hobby that simply happened to generate a high income. He had no concept of the forensic auditing software I commanded or the federal regulations I enforced daily. He was minimizing the exact skills I would soon use to dismantle his entire existence. My father, a rugged coal mine auditor, taught me early on that men in expensive suits will always try to sell you a bridge. "Always check the pilings," he used to say. Liam was trying to sell me a bridge built on guilt, and I was already inspecting the rot underneath. The SUV hit a pothole, jarring the quiet tension. In the center console, Liam's cell phone lit up with a bright glow. I glanced down. A text message preview flashed across the lock screen. It was from Richard. The message read, "Is she handled? We need this sorted before Friday." My breath hitched in my throat. Is she handled? We need this sorted before Friday. That text was not about a grandmother worrying over a new baby. That was the sterile, urgent language of a business transaction. Richard and Liam were operating on a deadline. The demand for me to quit my job was not a spontaneous idea born out of concern for Jessica. It was a coordinated, calculated siege. They needed me out of the workforce, stripped of my financial autonomy, and trapped at home for a very specific reason. We pulled into the driveway of our home. Liam threw the gear shift into park and turned off the engine. Without another word, he stepped out of the vehicle, marched up the front steps, and went straight inside. When I walked through the front door, I heard the guest bedroom lock click into place. He was giving me the silent treatment, a classic manipulation tactic designed to make me feel isolated and desperate for his approval. I did not chase him. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of ice water, and leaned against the marble counter. The house felt vast and empty. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket to check my work emails. Instead, a notification from a private local community group caught my eye. It was the Morgantown Country Club Elite page. Beatrice had not wasted a single hour. While Liam drove us home, she drafted a digital character assassination. I opened the post. Beatrice described her daughter as a fragile, exhausted new mother doing her best. Then she introduced me into the narrative. She did not mention my demanding career or my financial contributions to her son. She called me a sterile corporate climber who refused to spend even a few hours helping my own flesh and blood. The post painted me as a hollow shell of a woman who despised children simply because I had none of my own. In our tight-knit, affluent community, reputation is currency. Beatrice was weaponizing my empty womb to bankrupt my social standing. She assumed that if she turned the town against me, the social isolation would break my spirit. She thought I would come crawling back to the estate in tears, willing to quit my job just to regain their polite smiles. I locked my phone screen. The ice clinked softly against the glass in my hand. They wanted a war. They thought they were hunting a vulnerable target who would fold under family pressure. But as I stood alone in the dark kitchen, a cold, searing focus washed over me. The mourning for my marriage evaporated. I decided right then to stop being the compliant wife. I was going to find out exactly what deadline Richard was referring to, and I was going to let them choke on the ashes of their own deceit. The glowing screen of my phone illuminated the dark kitchen counter. I stared at the words Beatrice had typed into the country club private forum, feeling the venom drip from every sentence. She painted a masterpiece of character assassination, reducing my entire existence to a cold, barren caricature. She knew exactly which nerves to sever in a tight-knit Appalachian town where old money and traditional family values ruled. I set the phone down, face down, on the marble. The quiet of the house was no longer peaceful. It felt like a holding cell. I turned my gaze toward the floor-to-ceiling windows facing the backyard. The first true storm of the season had arrived. Thick, heavy snow cascaded through the darkness, burying the manicured lawn, the stone pathways, and the ancient oak trees under a pristine, suffocating layer of white. The temperature outside was dropping rapidly, but it paled in comparison to the sudden, bitter freeze that had just settled over my life. The winter storm was a perfect reflection of my marriage, beautiful and flawless on the surface, while quietly suffocating everything trapped underneath. I left the kitchen and walked up the grand staircase. My heels made no sound on the thick carpet. I passed the guest bedroom. The heavy wooden door was firmly shut, the brass lock engaged from the inside. Liam was using silence as a weapon. He believed that if he withdrew his affection and physically barred me from his presence, I would crumble. He expected me to knock on that door weeping, ready to trade my career for his forgiveness. I did not stop. I walked into the master suite and stepped into the ensuite bathroom. I shed my tailored corporate clothing, letting the expensive fabric fall to the tiled floor. I turned the shower handle all the way to the hottest setting and stepped under the spray. The scalding water hit my skin, sending a shockwave through my numb body. For the first few minutes, I just stood there, with my hands pressed flat against the wet slate wall, letting the steam fill the room. Then the adrenaline from the dining room ambush finally wore off, leaving behind a profound, hollow ache. This was not a sterile corporate merger dissolving. This was my life. I truly loved the man I married. I wept for the future I thought we were building together. I remembered the early days before the boutique firm, before his parents decided I was a threat. I remembered Liam bringing me black coffee at 2 a.m. while I studied for my federal compliance certifications. He used to tell me he admired my brilliant mind. He made me feel secure. But as the hot water mixed with the tears streaming down my face, the brutal truth washed over me. He did not love my brilliant mind. He loved the comfort my mind provided. He loved the luxury vehicles, the country club memberships, and the pristine image my income afforded him. The moment my intellect became an obstacle to his family demands, I ceased to be his partner. I became a subordinate who needed to be disciplined. The grief of a dying marriage is a heavy physical thing. My chest heaved with ragged sobs. I slid down the slick slate wall until I was sitting on the floor of the shower, pulling my knees to my chest. I allowed myself to mourn the illusion I had fought so hard to maintain. I cried for the wasted years, for the endless compromises I made to protect a fragile male ego, and for the family I thought I possessed. I stayed on that shower floor until the water began to turn lukewarm. The physical act of crying drained the sorrow right out of my veins, leaving behind a stark, unclouded clarity. I stood up, turned the silver handle, and shut off the water. The sudden silence in the bathroom was absolute. I stepped out, wrapped a towel around my shoulders, and walked over to the vanity. I reached out and wiped the thick condensation from the mirror. I looked at my own reflection. My eyes were red, my wet hair clinging to my collarbones. But the woman staring back at me was no longer mourning. The tears stopped. The grief evaporated, replaced by a cold, searing resolve. My father raised a fighter, not a martyr. Beatrice and Liam wanted to play a high-stakes game of leverage, assuming I was too soft to strike back. They forgot that I dismantle corrupt empires for a living. The next 48 hours were an exercise in psychological warfare. The freeze inside our home mirrored the blizzard raging outside. Liam left the house before dawn and returned long after dark, ensuring we never crossed paths. He was waiting for my surrender. He assumed the quiet would starve me of emotional support. He was also relying on his mother's social campaign to break me, and Beatrice was certainly trying. On Tuesday morning, I drove into downtown Morgantown to pick up my usual espresso before heading to the corporate tower. The downtown area is a picturesque stretch of historic brick buildings and high-end boutiques fueled entirely by the gossip of the local elite. As I walked into the corner cafe, the lively chatter died instantly. I approached the counter. A woman I had known for 3 years, a local bakery owner whom I had given free tax compliance advice, was standing by the pastry case. I offered a polite nod. She quickly averted her eyes, picked up her paper cup, and hurried out the door without a word. The barista, who normally asked about my weekend, handed me my cup in stiff silence, refusing to meet my gaze. Beatrice poison had spread through the town water supply. In this secluded ecosystem of old Appalachian money siding against the Roberts matriarch was social suicide. They chose to protect their own, falling in line with the narrative that I was a cruel, unnatural woman, refusing to help an overwhelmed mother. I took my espresso and walked out into the freezing wind. The isolation was meant to crush me, but it only confirmed my theory. This level of coordinated character assassination required immense effort. Beatrice was desperate. Liam was desperate. Richard's text message echoed in my mind. Is she handled? We need this sorted before Friday. I arrived at my corner glass office and stared out over the snow-covered city. Friday. What was happening on Friday? Jessica needed a nanny, but a nanny does not have a Friday deadline. Financial ledgers have deadlines. Bank audits have deadlines. I sat at my mahogany desk and opened my encrypted laptop. I needed to understand the financial bridge connecting my husband's sudden panic, my father-in-law urgent text, and my sister-in-law supposed mental breakdown. I spent the entire day tracing public records, looking for a weak point in the Roberts family armor. I found nothing obvious. They hid their secrets well behind thick corporate veils and private trusts. I needed a mistake. I needed someone to slip up and hand me the key to their hidden kingdom. That mistake arrived a few hours later, delivered right to my doorstep under the cover of darkness. It was late Tuesday night. The winter storm had intensified, howling against the windows of my home office. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing a stack of compliance reports, enjoying the solitude of the empty house. Liam was still out, likely at the country club, nursing a scotch and complaining to his father about his stubborn wife. Suddenly, a harsh, grating sound pierced through the howling wind. It was the distinct noise of thick rubber tires sliding and tearing against the frozen gravel of my long driveway. I froze in my leather chair. A vehicle was speeding toward the house, moving far too fast for the icy conditions. The engine revved loudly, followed by an abrupt, skidding halt near the front porch. I waited for the chime of the doorbell. I waited for a heavy knock. Neither came. Instead, I heard the heavy thud of a car door slamming shut. A second later, the engine roared back to life. The tires spun wildly, spitting gravel and ice, desperate to gain traction, as the vehicle sped away back into the dark, tree-lined road. My heart hammered against my ribs. The isolation of the property suddenly felt terrifying. I stood up from my desk, walked down the dark hallway, and approached the foyer. I reached out, turned the heavy brass deadbolt, and pulled the front door open to the bitter, biting cold. The icy gust hit my face like a physical strike. Snow swirled across the porch, illuminated only by the faint yellow glow of the carriage lights flanking the entryway. I squinted into the darkness, tracking a pair of red taillights as they disappeared around the final bend of the private road. The roar of the engine faded, swallowed by the howling wind, leaving behind a chilling silence. I lowered my gaze. There, sitting directly on the freezing concrete, was a charcoal gray designer bassinet. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped out in my bare feet. The frost bit into my skin, but I hardly registered the pain. Inside the carrier, swaddled in a thin beige cashmere blanket, was my newborn nephew, Finn. He let out a weak, high-pitched whimper. His tiny face was exposed to the biting Appalachian air, his cheeks flushed an unnatural pink. The temperature was dropping into the low 20s. A few more minutes out here, and the cold would have done irreversible damage. The scene from the dining room flashed in my mind. Jessica, carelessly tossing her expensive leather clutch near the open flame of a candle, oblivious to the danger until her mother intervened. I realized in that frozen moment that her negligence had reached its sickening conclusion. She did not merely mistreat inanimate luxury goods. She treated human life with the exact same disposable indifference. I dropped to my knees, wrapping my arms around the heavy carrier. Tucked beneath the thin cashmere fold was a piece of stiff, cream-colored cardstock. I pulled it out with trembling fingers. The handwriting was elegant, looping, and devoid of any maternal concern. Need a break. Have fun. 4 words. No feeding schedule. No emergency contact numbers. Just a flippant dismissal. Jessica had driven to my isolated property in the middle of a winter storm and abandoned her child on the ice. This was not a desperate mother seeking help. This was a calculated game of chicken. She assumed my basic human decency would force me to accept the maternal burden she refused to carry. She believed I would bring the baby inside, care for him, and ultimately cave to the family demand to become his permanent caretaker. I hoisted the bassinet by its leather handle and hurried back inside, throwing my weight against the heavy oak door until the deadbolt clicked shut. The sudden warmth of the foyer enveloped us, a stark contrast to the lethal cold outside. The quiet hum of the central heating felt like a lifeline. I carried the bassinet into the kitchen and set it gently onto the center of the marble island. My hands shook as I unbuckled the safety harness. I lifted Finn from the cold carrier, pressing his small, shivering body against my chest. His breathing was rapid, his skin still chilled to the touch. I rubbed his back, murmuring soft assurances, pacing the length of the kitchen, until his shivering began to subside. The marble floors were cool under my bare feet, grounding me in the reality of the situation. As his body temperature normalized, the sheer cruelty of the Roberts family strategy settled over me. Jessica had weaponized her own infant. They relied entirely on my sense of moral obligation. They thought bringing a vulnerable child into my home would trigger an instinct to protect him, binding me to their will. They expected me to cancel my morning meetings, call my corporate office, and submit the resignation they demanded at Sunday dinner. Finn let out a louder cry, rooting against my shoulder. He was hungry. I walked over to the matching leather diaper bag Jessica had left sitting beside the bassinet. I unzipped the main compartment, searching for formula. The bag was a chaotic mess of misplaced priorities. I pushed aside expensive organic burp cloths, still in their packaging, a sterling silver teething ring, and a heavy glass bottle of luxury hand cream. There was no logic to the packing. Finally, I found 2 pre-mixed bottles of formula, tossed haphazardly at the very bottom. I reached deep into the side pocket to retrieve one of the bottles. As my fingers slipped past the slick nylon lining, they brushed against something hard, flat, and metallic. It was too large and heavy to be a mobile phone. I gripped the cold aluminum edge and pulled it free from the dark pocket, bringing it under the bright pendant lights of the kitchen island. It was a rose gold iPad. I stared at the sleek device resting in my palm. In the corporate compliance world, a secured digital device is a locked vault. Breaking into one requires sophisticated software, legal warrants, and weeks of time. But Jessica was not a cautious corporate entity. She was a vain, careless socialite who valued convenience over security. I pressed the home button. The screen illuminated, casting a bright artificial glow across the dark kitchen counter and illuminating the sleeping infant in my arms. The prompt did not ask for a complex alphanumeric passcode. It did not require facial recognition. It simply displayed a small arrow pointing upward. Swipe to unlock. I dragged my thumb across the smooth glass. The home screen appeared instantly populated with social media applications, luxury shopping platforms, and an overflowing email inbox. She had left her digital life as unguarded as her own child. The hubris required to hand your entire personal ecosystem over to the exact person you are trying to extort was staggering. I looked at the baby, his chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm, and then back down at the glowing screen. A heavy, defining choice sat before me. If I prepared the bottle, fed Finn, and quietly assumed the role of the dutiful aunt, the crisis would temporarily vanish. The family would praise my sacrifice. Liam would unlock the guest bedroom door and resume playing the charming husband. But I would become an active accomplice in their toxic delusion. I would be validating their belief that my career was meaningless and that I was a pawn easily maneuvered by guilt. More importantly, I would eventually have to hand this innocent child back to a mother who viewed him as an inconvenient prop. Returning a baby to a woman capable of abandoning him on a freezing porch was infinitely more dangerous than disrupting the family peace. My father taught me that when you find a discrepancy in the ledger, you follow the numbers until the structure collapses. You do not cover for the fraud. You expose the rot to the light of day. Jessica left her device open, assuming I would be too busy playing the panicked nanny to look closely. She forgot who she targeted. I rested Finn securely in the crook of my left arm, supporting his fragile neck. With my right hand, I tapped the mail icon on the iPad tablet. I needed to understand why Richard was so frantic about a Friday deadline in his text message to Liam. I needed to know why a wealthy family with vast real estate holdings could not simply hire a discreet professional nanny to solve their problem. The email inbox loaded a cluttered stream of digital noise. I bypassed the promotional spam from designer boutiques and shipping confirmations for expensive cosmetics. I navigated straight to the flagged messages folder, searching for any correspondence containing the word deadline, contract, or payment. The search results populated in a fraction of a second. A threaded conversation sat at the very top, marked with high-priority red exclamation points. The sender was a prominent public relations firm based out of Manhattan. The subject line read, "Final execution required Friday." My pulse slowed to a steady, calculated beat. The pieces of the puzzle were hovering just above the board, waiting to be snapped into place. I tapped the screen, opening the attached document inside the email thread. The digital pages revealed a truth so calculating and greedy, it made the winter storm raging outside feel warm by comparison. The words on the screen detailed a precise, lucrative narrative that Jessica was actively selling to the public. I was about to discover exactly why the Roberts dynasty needed a free, silent, family-bound caretaker. The mystery of the sudden Friday deadline was staring back at me in stark, black-and-white text, laying out a multi-million-dollar lie they were desperate to protect. The stark white background of the digital document cast a pale glow across the dark kitchen. I supported Finn against my shoulder, rocking him in a slow, steady rhythm as my eyes scanned the dense legal text displayed on the screen of the tablet. In my profession, as a compliance director, sifting through hundreds of pages of corporate jargon is a daily routine. I know exactly where companies hide their escape hatches and their strict demands. I bypassed the standard liability waivers and boilerplate indemnification clauses, dragging my finger down to the compensation schedule. The header featured the sleek, minimalist logo of a global organic wellness brand, a company famous for selling premium baby products and promoting an earthy, flawless vision of modern motherhood. The numbers printed on the screen confirmed the sheer scale of the deception. The brand was offering Jessica a staggering $2.2 million, structured in quarterly payout installments over a 24-month period. I let out a slow, quiet breath. This was not a modest social media sponsorship. This was a life-altering corporate endorsement. But a company does not hand over that kind of capital simply to place a logo on a careless socialite social media page. They pay for a highly specific, curated narrative. They pay for a pristine public image that resonates with their target demographic. I scrolled down to the termination conditions specifically targeting the morality and public conduct clauses. The stipulations were rigid and unforgiving. The wellness brand required their new ambassador to cultivate and maintain the persona of a resilient, self-sufficient, single mother. The entire marketing campaign was engineered around the concept of Jessica balancing a glamorous life while raising a child entirely on her own. The contract explicitly forbade the public use of hired help. The puzzle pieces snapped together with a sickening clarity, answering the one question that had bothered me since Sunday dinner. If Jessica was struggling, why did the wealthy Roberts family not simply hire a discreet professional au pair or an experienced night nurse? They certainly portrayed the image of having enough money to solve any domestic inconvenience. The answer was written in the strict penalty clauses of the document I was holding. A professional caretaker is a hired employee. Employees require background checks, tax forms, and most importantly, they observe everything. Even if Richard and Beatrice forced a luxury nanny to sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement, the risk remained too high. A disgruntled or opportunistic employee could easily snap a covert photo of themselves feeding Finn, send it to a gossip blog, and shatter the illusion of the independent single mother. A single leaked photograph proving Jessica relied on a staff to raise her child would trigger an immediate breach of contract. The organic wellness brand would instantly terminate the agreement to protect their authentic image, and the millions would vanish. The Roberts family could not trust an outsider. They needed a ghost. They needed a caretaker bound by the archaic silent rules of family loyalty. They needed someone they could control, intimidate, and socially blackmail into silence. I fit their criteria perfectly. Beatrice assumed my desire to be accepted into their Appalachian circle would keep my mouth shut. They engineered the Sunday dinner ambush to force me out of my corporate career, intending to trap me in my own home as a free, invisible nanny. The entire dynasty sat around that mahogany table, chewing their expensive roasted lamb, fully complicit in a plan to steal my time and my autonomy, just to secure Jessica a corporate payout. To confirm the true depth of the sociopathy, I closed the legal document and opened the calendar application on the tablet. I wanted to see what kind of postpartum mental health crisis required such urgent, drastic measures. The schedule for the upcoming week was blocked out in bright red banners. Jessica was not planning to spend the next few days resting in a darkened bedroom to recover her strength. She had a scheduled departure for a private charter flight out of Morgantown, heading straight to Aspen, Colorado. She was booked for a sponsored luxury winter retreat, complete with ski lodge reservations and content filming sessions. She drove to my secluded property in the middle of a bitter winter storm and abandoned her shivering innocent infant on an icy concrete porch so she could drink champagne in the mountains and pretend to be a devoted mother for a camera. A quiet, clinical rage settled over me. Finn finished his bottle, his small hands relaxing against my collarbone. His breathing deepened, shifting into the peaceful rhythm of a deep sleep. I carefully lowered him back into the charcoal designer bassinet, tucking a warm fleece blanket around his small frame. He was safe now, oblivious to the toxic machinery of the family he had been born into. I placed the rose gold tablet down on the marble counter next to the empty baby bottle. The sheer scale of the fraud was breathtaking. But as the initial shock faded, the forensic auditor inside my mind snagged on a glaring discrepancy, a loose thread that threatened to unravel my understanding of the entire situation. Jessica's motive was obvious. It was an open secret in our social circle that she had exhausted her grandfather trust fund years ago. She spent money with reckless abandon, funding European vacations and designer wardrobes she could not afford. She desperately needed this $2.2 million lifeline to maintain her vain lifestyle. Beatrice and Richard's motive was also clear. They existed to protect the pristine image of the Roberts family name. Securing a lucrative, high-profile endorsement for their daughter fit perfectly into their narrative of Appalachian royalty. But Liam's behavior remained an anomaly. My husband ran a boutique wealth management firm. He drove a $100,000 vehicle. He projected an aura of endless self-sustaining capital. He frequently boasted at country club mixers about his market returns and his elite client roster. If his sister secured a brand deal, it benefited her checking account, not his. Yet Liam was the one acting as the frantic, ruthless enforcer. He was the one who gaslighted me in the car, twisting my words and demanding my submission. He was the one who locked himself in the guest bedroom to punish me for refusing the demand. And most importantly, Richard had texted Liam to ensure the situation was handled before the Friday deadline. Why was the patriarch of the family pressuring a supposedly successful investment manager to force his wife into submission over a lifestyle sponsorship? The math simply did not balance. Wealthy, secure men do not panic over someone else's income. They do not risk destroying their own marriage to act as a debt collector for a sibling unless their own survival depends on that exact payout. I stared at the dark hallway leading toward the front of the house. Liam's desperation felt layered thick with a terror that went far beyond fraternal loyalty. He was hiding something much deeper than a struggling boutique firm. He was financially tethered to Jessica's brand deal, acting as a bridge to keep her afloat, or perhaps relying on her impending millions to cover a catastrophic failure of his own. I realized the war waged at the dining room table was not just about a baby. It was about a structural financial collapse. The family was drowning, and they were trying to use my career as a life raft while they waited for a corporate rescue ship. I turned my gaze away from the kitchen island and looked toward the closed door of my home office. Inside that room sat my encrypted corporate terminal, loaded with enterprise-grade software, capable of tracing global wire transfers, monitoring regulatory filings, and executing deep financial audits. I needed to stop looking at Jessica's carelessly unguarded tablet. I needed to look directly at my husband. I needed to open the books on his boutique wealth management firm and see exactly what kind of ghost he was hiding in his own ledgers. I picked up the diaper bag, ensuring the baby was secure, and walked slowly down the hall toward the office. The time for guessing was over. I was going to follow the money, and I was going to find out exactly why Liam was so afraid of Friday. The heavy oak door of my home office clicked shut, sealing me inside the quiet sanctuary. The storm continued to batter the exterior of the house, rattling the window panes, but inside, the air was perfectly still. I set the baby monitor on the edge of the mahogany desk, keeping a watchful eye on Finn, who remained fast asleep in the kitchen. I settled into my high-backed leather chair and powered on my corporate terminal. The screen illuminated the dark room, casting a stark, artificial glow across my face. I bypassed the standard desktop interface, initiating the secure virtual private network that connected directly to the global energy conglomerate servers. My fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, entering a complex string of passcodes to unlock the enterprise-grade compliance software. For the past 10 years, I've built a reputation on my ability to locate structural financial rot. I specialized in dismantling corrupt corporate frameworks, tracing hidden offshore routing numbers, and ensuring multi-billion-dollar entities adhered to strict federal regulations. Liam always treated my career with a thin veil of polite condescension, frequently referring to my daily duties as just running spreadsheets. He believed his title as a boutique wealth manager carried more weight simply because his name was embossed on a brass plaque downtown. He was about to discover the fatal flaw in underestimating a woman who hunts ghosts for a living. I initiated a targeted diagnostic sweep on Liam Firm. I did not focus on his public marketing materials or the glossy quarterly reports he proudly distributed at the country club. I pulled the raw data. I accessed the secure clearinghouse registries, cross-referencing his state licensing numbers with federal banking alerts. I instructed the software to build a comprehensive map of his firm cash flow over the preceding 36 months. A progress bar appeared on the screen, a thin blue line creeping steadily toward completion. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, marking the deep, silent hours of the morning. I sat back, watching the blue line hit 100%. The screen flickered, and the compiled ledger cascaded down the monitor. The numbers stared back at me stark and undeniable. The truth was not a minor accounting error or a string of bad market investments. The truth was a catastrophic, deliberate crime. Liam was not a successful wealth manager. He was the architect of a localized Ponzi scheme. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The data revealed a systemic pattern of embezzlement, engineered to prey on the trust of his affluent social circle. For 3 years, Liam had been quietly siphoning the principal capital out of the retirement accounts belonging to the local West Virginia elite. He targeted the older generation, the men who played golf with his father, and assumed the Roberts family pedigree was a guarantee of financial integrity. To mask the theft, Liam created a maze of fraudulent ledgers. He generated fake performance statements showing steady conservative growth, while simultaneously routing the stolen cash out of their portfolios under the guise of vague offshore consulting fees and administrative retainers. The scope of the betrayal was staggering, but the destination of the stolen funds painted an even darker picture of the Roberts dynasty. I traced the routing numbers attached to the fake consulting invoices, following the money as it flowed through 3 different domestic shell companies. The first shell company was registered in Delaware under the name Milan Ventures. I cross-referenced the business registry and found Jessica listed as the sole managing director. Liam was funneling stolen investor capital directly into his sister checking account. He was actively financing her designer wardrobe, her luxury vacations, and the fake social media followers she needed to secure her corporate brand deal. He was operating as her personal, illegal bridge loan, keeping her vain influencer lifestyle afloat until the $2.2 million payout arrived. He clearly intended to use her corporate sponsorship money to replace the stolen funds before his clients noticed the missing principal. But Jessica's vanity project was only a fraction of the drain. The software highlighted a second, much larger sequence of wire transfers. The majority of the embezzled cash was flowing into a corporate holding account tied to Appalachian Heritage Properties. That was Richard's commercial real estate firm. The patriarch of the family, the man who sat at the head of the Sunday dinner table demanding obedience, was a failure. The properties he loved to boast about at Chamber of Commerce meetings were hemorrhaging capital. Richard was over-leveraged, drowning in high-interest debt, and incapable of maintaining the illusion of his self-made wealth. Rather than admit defeat and face the humiliation of bankruptcy, he forced his son to steal from their friends to cover his commercial losses. The entire Roberts family was a functioning criminal enterprise built on a foundation of stolen retirement funds. They were desperately passing stolen money back and forth, trying to plug the holes in a sinking ship, hoping Jessica brand deal would eventually provide enough liquid cash to save them all. The reason Liam gaslighted me in the car, the reason he locked himself in the guest bedroom, and the reason Richard sent that frantic text message demanding I be handled before Friday, suddenly snapped into perfect, terrifying focus. Friday was the end of the fiscal quarter. Friday was the day federal regulators, or senior auditors, might randomly request access to his boutique firm records. Liam did not want me to quit my job simply to appease his mother or act as a free nanny. He needed me blind. He knew my corporate credentials granted me legal access to this exact terminal. He knew I possessed the software and the skill to uncover his federal crimes in a matter of minutes if I ever grew suspicious enough to look. He needed to strip me of my corporate title, sever my connection to the financial compliance sector, and confine me to the walls of our house. He wanted me distracted by a screaming infant, entirely cut off from the tools that could destroy him. He was trying to force my resignation to save his own freedom. I rested my hands flat on the cool mahogany desk. The man I had shared a bed with for 6 years viewed my career as a lethal threat. He viewed my intellect as a liability that needed to be neutralized. He conspired with his parents to sacrifice my life to protect their Ponzi scheme. A cold, predatory calm settled over my mind. The grief I felt in the shower hours ago felt like a distant, naive memory. In the corporate restructuring world, when you uncover a toxic asset built entirely on fraud, you do not attempt to negotiate with the corrupt board of directors. You gather the evidence, you lock the doors, and you let the regulators dismantle the building brick by brick. I reached for the computer mouse, intending to print every single fraudulent invoice, wire transfer, and shell company registry. I needed hard, physical copies of the ledgers to hand over to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Before I could click the print command, my personal cell phone, resting near the edge of the desk, vibrated violently. The sudden noise shattered the silence of the office. The screen lit up with a bright blue banking alert. I picked up the device, assuming it was an automated low balance warning for a minor subscription service. I tapped the notification, opening the application for our primary joint checking account. We maintained this account as a liquid safety net, keeping a substantial buffer for property taxes and emergency home repairs. The balance displayed on the screen read $0 and 0 cents. I stared at the digital numbers blinking to clear my vision. I refreshed the application, assuming a server error was causing a display glitch. The screen reloaded. The balance remained a stark, unforgiving 0. I clicked into the recent transaction history. At exactly 3:14 in the morning, while I was sitting in my office uncovering his federal crimes, Liam had logged into the banking portal from his phone in the guest bedroom. He initiated an emergency external wire transfer, draining $120,000 from the joint account. He emptied every single cent of the emergency safety net I had built using my corporate bonuses over the past 2 years. He stole my money in the middle of the night. A sharp electric rush of adrenaline flooded my veins. This was not a random act of spite. This was a calculated, aggressive maneuver. He was executing the next phase of the Roberts family's siege, setting a trap designed to break me, completely unaware that he had just handed me the very weapon I would use to sever his head. The pale blue light of the banking application cast a harsh glow across the dark mahogany desk. I stared at the 0 balance, the digital proof of Liam midnight theft, burning into my vision. The transfer confirmation code glared back at me, a sterile combination of letters and numbers representing $120,000 of my hard-earned corporate bonuses vanished into the ether. In standard domestic disputes, an angry spouse might empty a shared account out of raw emotion or spite. But Liam was not operating on emotion. He was a fraudster, executing a calculated financial starvation tactic. He assumed that a woman suddenly stripped of her liquid cash would panic. He believed the sudden inability to pay the upcoming property taxes or access emergency funds would break my resolve, forcing me to knock on the guest bedroom door, weeping and ready to submit to his mother demands. He wanted me dependent, terrified, and compliant. He severely miscalculated. I did not panic. I did not run down the hallway to pound my fists against his locked door. I placed my cell phone face down on the desk and reached for my cold cup of coffee. I took a slow sip, letting the bitter taste ground me. My father, the meticulous coal mine auditor, spent his life emphasizing the power of paper trails. He taught me that when a desperate man steals from the front register, you immediately check the back vault. A thief who feels comfortable draining a joint savings account has likely already compromised the larger assets. I set the coffee mug aside and turned my attention back to the encrypted corporate terminal. Liam just escalated a marital disagreement into financial warfare. I needed to assess the structural integrity of my entire life. I bypassed his boutique firm ledgers and navigated directly to the County Public Records database for Monongalia County. I typed in the address of our marital home. The sprawling, custom-built colonial sitting on 3 acres of pristine Appalachian woodland was our most valuable shared asset. We purchased the property 4 years ago, building significant equity as the local market surged. The digital deed loaded on the screen. The ownership remained listed as joint tenancy with right of survivorship. I clicked into the associated lien and encumbrance history, expecting to see a clean record containing only our primary mortgage. Instead, a secondary, highly active financial instrument appeared directly below our original loan. My breath caught in the back of my throat. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the dense legal text of the filing. 6 months ago, while I was traveling for a corporate compliance summit in Houston, a massive home equity line of credit had been opened against the property. The credit limit was set at $400,000. The ledger indicated that $380,000 had already been drawn, systematically drained over the past 2 quarters. Liam had hollowed out our house, converting our equity into liquid cash to feed his failing Ponzi scheme and prop up his father's real estate empire. A chilling realization washed over me. In the state of West Virginia, property laws are incredibly strict regarding primary marital residences. A financial institution cannot legally approve a home equity line of credit, nor place a secondary lien on a shared property without the explicit, notarized signatures of both spouses. A bank requires both parties to sit at a closing table, present identification, and sign the documents in the presence of a licensed official. I had never attended a closing meeting. I had never seen this document. I had never consented to borrowing a single dime against my home. I clicked the icon to download the scanned copy of the original closing contract. The PDF loaded, displaying 20 pages of dense banking clauses. I scrolled directly to the final signature page. There, resting on the designated line above my printed name, was a signature. It was a remarkably accurate forgery, mimicking the sharp, looping cursive I used on official corporate documents. But it was not my hand. To the untrained eye, it looked authentic, but the pressure points and the slant of the letters were slightly off. Liam had forged my name to secure $400,000. I shifted my gaze to the bottom corner of the page. A prominent circular notary stamp was pressed into the paper, accompanied by a scrawled signature verifying the identities of the signers. I recognized the name printed inside the stamp. It was the junior administrative assistant employed at Liam Boutique Wealth Management Firm. The depth of his arrogance was stunning. He did not just commit financial infidelity. He committed federal bank fraud, wire fraud, and felony forgery. He colluded with his own employee to illegally encumber my property, assuming I would never pull the public records because I trusted him. He thought his charming facade and custom suits provided a permanent shield against scrutiny. He handed me the kill shot on a silver platter. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 5 times. The sun was just beginning to break over the eastern ridge of the mountains, casting a pale gray light through the frost-covered windows of my office. The winter storm had passed, leaving behind a silent, frozen world. I did not wait for normal business hours. I picked up my cell phone and dialed a private number I kept saved for extreme corporate emergencies. The line rang twice before a sharp, awake voice answered. It was Marcus, the most ruthless, aggressive financial litigation and divorce attorney in Morgantown. Marcus and I had collaborated on several high-stakes corporate bankruptcies. He understood my communication style perfectly. He did not offer warm pleasantries. Catherine Marcus said, his voice crisp. "It is 5 a.m. Who are we liquidating?" "I need to file an ex parte emergency injunction, Marcus." I stated, my tone devoid of any emotion. My husband initiated a malicious dissipation of marital assets at 3 o'clock this morning, draining $120,000 from our joint savings. Furthermore, I just uncovered a forged closing document for a $400,000 home equity line of credit executed 6 months ago. He used his own firm notary to fake my signature. I heard the distinct sound of a laptop opening on his end of the line, followed by the rapid clatter of keystrokes. Marcus did not ask if I was sure. He knew I never made an accusation without undeniable proof. "Consider the drafting process started," Marcus replied, the professional thrill evident in his voice. "An ex parte order based on documented forgery and active asset dissipation bypasses the standard waiting periods. I will have a judge sign the freeze order before he finishes his morning coffee." "What is the target?" "I want everything frozen, Marcus. Freeze his personal checking accounts, freeze his credit cards, and most importantly, execute a judicial hold on every single business account tied to his boutique wealth management firm. Shut down his entire liquidity pipeline. It will hit the banking servers by noon," Marcus confirmed. "Secure the original forgery documents. Do not alert him. Let him hit the invisible wall at full speed." I ended the call and placed the phone back on the desk. A profound, icy satisfaction settled deep in my chest. Liam was currently asleep in the guest bedroom, dreaming of his impending victory. He believed he had successfully starved me out, assuming the stolen savings would force my resignation and secure his safety from federal auditors. He thought he was the apex predator in our marriage. He was about to wake up to a reality where his bank cards bounced, his firm payroll failed to process, and his ability to transfer stolen Ponzi funds was permanently severed. I was going to let him dress in his expensive suit, walk out the front door, and step directly into a financial trap he could never escape. But freezing his assets was only the defensive maneuver. Liam still believed he held the upper hand because he assumed I was unaware of his crimes. I needed him to maintain that false sense of security while the snare tightened. I needed to ensure he remained completely distracted, arrogant, and oblivious to the guillotine poised above his neck. I needed a diversion. The pale morning light filtering through the frosted window panes of my office signaled the start of a very dangerous game. I had just initiated a lethal legal strike against my husband, but the digital gears of the judicial system take hours to fully engage. Marcus was drafting the injunction the judge still needed to review. The forgery evidence and the banking servers required time to process the freeze orders. If Liam suspected for even a fraction of a second that I had uncovered his federal crimes, his survival instinct would override his arrogance. A cornered fraudster is unpredictable. He could rush to his downtown office and shred physical documents. He could initiate a wire transfer to move his remaining stolen capital into untraceable offshore accounts. He might even attempt to flee the state before the authorities understood the scope of his Ponzi scheme. I needed to pin him in place. I needed him docile, overconfident, and stationary while the invisible snare tightened around his ankles. I needed to feed him a distraction so enticing that he would abandon all defensive maneuvers. I turned back to my corporate terminal and opened a blank word processing document. I transformed my mindset from a forensic auditor into a defeated, broken wife. I let my fingers hover over the keyboard, channeling the exact tone of submission the Roberts family demanded. I typed out an official letter of resignation addressed to the executive board of my energy conglomerate. The language I chose was a masterpiece of manufactured surrender. I wrote that insurmountable domestic obligations required my immediate attention. I cited the overwhelming pressure of balancing a high-level executive role with sudden family health crises. I requested an expedited departure, effective immediately, waiving my standard corporate transition period. I printed the document on heavy cream-colored stationery to give it the undeniable weight of reality. I picked up my favorite fountain pen and signed my name at the bottom. My signature was sharp and authentic, a stark contrast to the sloppy forgery Liam had stamped onto our property deed 6 months ago. I left the office and walked down the quiet hallway toward the kitchen. Finn was stirring in the charcoal bassinet, letting out soft, rhythmic coos. I prepared a fresh bottle of warm formula, lifted the fragile infant from his blankets, and fed him. Holding the innocent collateral of their toxic dynasty grounded my resolve. This child deserved a chance at life, away from a family that viewed him as a public relations prop. I placed the signed resignation letter directly in the center of the marble kitchen island, right next to the espresso machine. It was impossible to miss. Then I waited. Just before 8 o'clock, the heavy brass lock on the guest bedroom door clicked open. The sound echoed down the grand staircase. Heavy, deliberate footsteps descended the hardwood steps. Liam was awake. He walked into the kitchen wearing a tailored cashmere sweater and dark, expensive slacks. His hair was perfectly styled. He projected the image of a man entirely at ease, the undisputed master of his domain. He did not look at me. He walked straight toward the espresso machine, intending to maintain the silent treatment. He wanted me to speak first. He wanted me to beg for the return of the stolen savings. I stood by the sink, cradling the baby against my shoulder. I kept my gaze focused downward on the floor tiles. I rounded my shoulders, adopting the physical posture of a woman who had spent the entire night crying in terror over a drained bank account. Liam reached for a porcelain espresso cup, but his hand stopped mid-air. His eyes locked onto the cream-colored stationery resting on the marble counter. The silence in the kitchen shifted. I watched from the corner of my eye as he picked up the paper. His eyes darted back and forth, scanning the paragraphs. He read the words, insurmountable domestic obligations. He read the phrase, effective immediately. He stared at my authentic signature at the bottom of the page. The physical transformation of his posture was immediate and profound. The rigid tension in his shoulders melted away. His chest expanded. A slow, arrogant smirk spread across his handsome face, reaching his eyes and settling into a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. He genuinely believed his midnight starvation tactic had worked. He thought the sudden disappearance of my emergency savings had crushed my spirit, leaving me so panicked about our financial future that I caved to his demands just to restore the peace. He assumed he had successfully severed my connection to the corporate compliance sector, eliminating the only real threat to his hidden crimes. He set the letter down and finally turned to look at me. His gaze was dripping with patronizing sympathy. "You made the right choice, Kat," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring, like a parent praising a child for finally learning a hard lesson. "I know this feels like a sacrifice today, but you will see it is for the best. We will figure out the finances. I will take care of us. I always do." I kept my eyes lowered, offering a faint, trembling nod. I let him savor the illusion of his dominance. "My father wants to meet at the country club this morning," Liam continued, rolling up the sleeves of his cashmere sweater. "The outdoor greens are buried under snow, so we are utilizing the indoor golf simulator. I will tell him the good news. Beatrice will be thrilled. We can put this ugly disagreement behind us." He walked over, placed a light, condescending kiss on the top of my head, and grabbed his keys from the entryway table. He hoisted his heavy leather travel bag over his shoulder and walked out the front door. The engine of his luxury SUV roared to life, fading quickly as he navigated the icy driveway and headed toward the exclusive enclave of the Morgantown elite. The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the quiet house. I raised my head. I looked at the spot where he had just stood, and a cold smile touched my lips. The diversionary bait had worked flawlessly. The dramatic irony of the situation was almost intoxicating. Liam was currently driving through the snow-covered Appalachian hills, humming along to the radio, celebrating his perceived victory over his wife. He was heading to a luxury country club to smoke expensive cigars and drink premium bourbon, with his father fully intending to boast about how he successfully handled the situation before the Friday deadline. He had no idea that downtown, the invisible guillotine was dropping. While he pulled his vehicle into the valet lane, Marcus was walking into the county courthouse, handing the documented proof of felony forgery to a seasoned judge. While Liam selected his first golf club, the judicial freeze orders were transmitting through the secure federal banking networks. Within the hour, the automated clearinghouse system managing his boutique firm would trigger a hard default. The direct deposit payroll for his entire administrative staff would bounce, flashing bright red insufficient funds error codes across their screens. When Liam attempted to order a celebratory round of drinks at the country club bar, his Platinum business credit card would be declined. When he tried his personal debit card, the terminal would reject the chip. He was driving straight into a financial brick wall, entirely stripped of his liquidity, his stolen capital, and his fake prestige. He thought he was untouchable. He was a dead man walking. I picked up the fake resignation letter from the Marble Island, tore it into quarters, and dropped the heavy paper into the trash can. The first phase of the execution was complete. Liam was contained and neutralized. But the Roberts family operated as a unified front, and a severed limb means nothing if the heart is still beating. I looked down at the sleeping infant resting in my arms. Finn was breathing softly, oblivious to the storm raging around him. Keeping him in this house was a temporary measure. Jessica had abandoned him on the ice to secure a $2.2 million corporate payout built on a throne of lies. She expected me to cover her tracks while she packed her designer ski gear for Aspen. It was time to introduce my sister-in-law to the severe legal consequences of child abandonment. I reached for my cell phone, ready to dial a number that would obliterate her glamorous influencer facade and send the local authorities straight to her door. The heavy front door clicked shut, leaving the foyer in a profound, lingering quiet. Liam was gone, navigating the snow-covered roads toward the country club, wrapped in a blanket of unearned arrogance. I stood alone in the center of the kitchen, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the infant resting in the bassinet. I looked down at Finn. His tiny hands were curled into loose fists near his chin. He was innocent. entirely oblivious to the toxic machinery of the dynasty he had been born into. Handing him back to a mother who viewed his existence as a disposable public relations prop was infinitely more dangerous than disrupting the fragile peace of the Roberts family. A woman capable of leaving a shivering newborn on an icy concrete porch to secure a corporate payout would not suddenly develop a moral compass. I walked over to the marble counter and picked up my cell phone. I did not dial a family mediator. I dialed the direct dispatch line for the Monongalia County Police Department and requested an urgent response from Child Protective Services. The operator asked for my name and the nature of the emergency. I kept my voice flat, delivering the facts with the sterile precision of a corporate audit. I reported a physical child abandonment and stated that the biological mother posed an immediate flight risk due to a scheduled charter flight to Colorado. While I waited for the authorities to arrive, I prepared the necessary documentation. I walked into my home office and accessed the exterior security camera network. I downloaded the high-definition footage from the previous night, saving the file onto a silver encrypted flash drive. The video was undeniable. It clearly showed Jessica's luxury vehicle sliding onto the gravel, her stepping out into the freezing wind, dropping the charcoal bassinet directly onto the frost-covered stone, and speeding away without a single backward glance. Next, I exported the digital contract from her unlocked iPad, creating a clean PDF file of the $2.2 million wellness brand sponsorship. I placed the flash drive and the printed contract into a manila folder alongside the handwritten sticky note she had tucked into the baby blankets. 30 minutes later, the sweep of red and blue emergency lights cut through the stark white snow outside my living room windows. I opened the front door to greet them. 2 uniformed officers stepped onto the porch, their heavy boots crunching against the ice. They were accompanied by a crisis social worker wearing a thick wool coat. Their expressions were tight, clearly bracing themselves for a chaotic domestic dispute. They stepped into the heated foyer, their eyes briefly scanning the vaulted ceilings and the expensive artwork lining the walls. It is a rare occurrence for social services to be dispatched to this particular affluent zip code. The social worker bypassed the pleasantries and walked straight to the kitchen island. She expertly scooped Finn into her arms, checking his temperature and assessing his breathing. "Who left the infant here?" the lead officer asked, pulling a small notepad from his tactical vest. "My sister-in-law," I replied, handing him the manila folder. "Her name is Jessica Roberts. She left him on this porch late last night during the winter storm." The officer opened the folder, pulling out the handwritten sticky note. He shined a small penlight on the flippant words, his jaw hardening. He looked back up at me. "Do you know where she went? Is she suffering from a documented mental health crisis?" I looked at the woman holding my nephew. I considered explaining the country club dynamic, the vanity, and the distilled selfishness of my in-laws. Instead, I provided the only truth that mattered in a court of law. "She is not experiencing a mental health crisis," I stated. "She has a financial motive." I pointed to the silver flash drive resting inside the folder. That drive contains the exterior security footage of the abandonment. It also contains a signed corporate contract. She secured a multi-million-dollar endorsement deal that requires her to market herself as a single independent mother raising a child entirely without assistance. She dumped the baby here to force me into becoming a silent, unpaid nanny so she could travel to a sponsored ski trip in Aspen without violating her morality clause. The kitchen fell dead silent. Even the seasoned officers, professionals who witnessed the darkest corners of human behavior on a daily basis, seemed taken aback by the cold, calculated greed documented in that folder. Abandoning a child out of despair is a tragedy. Abandoning a child on the ice to secure a corporate payout is a felony. "We are taking the infant into emergency state custody," the social worker said, her tone shifting from concerned to rigidly procedural. "He will be placed with a vetted foster family this morning. A judge will issue an emergency protective order by noon." I nodded. I felt a brief, sharp pang of guilt looking at Finn's small face as the social worker wrapped him securely in a state-issued blanket. The foster system is imperfect, but placing him in the care of licensed professionals was the only way to shield him from becoming a leveraged pawn. The state of West Virginia would thoroughly vet his caregivers. The Roberts family would only use him for extortion. The officers cataloged the evidence, asked me to sign a formal statement, and walked out the front door. I watched their taillights fade down the snowy driveway, carrying the youngest member of the dynasty away from the toxicity. The house was empty again, but my work was not finished. I walked upstairs, took a rapid shower, and dressed in a sharp-tailored navy suit. I stepped into a pair of black leather stilettos, applied my makeup with surgical precision, and grabbed my briefcase. I did not intend to spend the day hiding in my kitchen. The resignation letter I left for Liam was a diversion. It was time to return to my actual throne. I drove through the plowed streets of downtown Morgantown, navigating the morning traffic until I reached the towering glass structure of the energy conglomerate. I swiped my security badge at the front desk, rode the elevator to the executive floor, and walked into my corner office. My staff nodded respectfully as I passed, unaware of the digital warfare I was actively conducting. I sat behind my sleek glass desk and opened my corporate email client. It was time to sever Jessica's lifeline. I drafted a new message targeting the Vice President of Public Relations for the Manhattan lifestyle brand that had foolishly offered Jessica the sponsorship. Brands operating in the lucrative mommy blogger space survive entirely on wholesome public perception. They cater to a demographic of earnest consumers who buy organic baby food and sustainable clothing. A corporation of that scale cannot afford proximity to actual child endangerment. I kept the email brief, adopting the sterile, factual tone of a corporate whistleblower. I attached the official case number generated by Child Protective Services. I attached the scanned copy of the flippant handwritten note. Finally, I uploaded the high-definition security camera footage depicting their newest brand ambassador dropping her infant onto freezing concrete and driving away. I clicked send. The digital payload launched through the server, destined to land in the inbox of a Manhattan executive who would undoubtedly panic the moment she opened the attachments. I leaned back in my chair and monitored the incoming data streams on my secondary monitor. Crisis management teams move with terrifying speed when millions of dollars are on the line. 45 minutes later, a notification popped up on my screen from an automated media scraper I had configured. The Organic Wellness brand released a brief, sterile press release. They announced the immediate termination of their partnership with Jessica Roberts, citing an unresolvable breach of their corporate code of conduct. The $2.2 million contract was vaporized into thin air. 10 minutes after that, a contact I maintained at the county precinct sent me a secure, encrypted text message. A judge had reviewed the security footage and the flight itinerary. An active warrant had just been issued for Jessica's arrest. Officers were currently en route to the private charter terminal to intercept her before she could board the plane to Aspen. Jessica was neutralized. Her vanity project was dead, and she was heading to a holding cell. I checked the time. It was approaching noon. The first phase of the execution was flawless. Now, the second phase was engaging. The automated judicial holds Marcus filed at dawn were officially hitting the banking servers. Across town at the exclusive indoor golf simulator Liam Platinum business cards were declining. The payroll for his administrative staff was bouncing. The invisible wall had materialized, and he had just smashed into it at full speed. I placed my cell phone face down on the glass desk. The calm inside my corner office was absolute. But I knew the silence would not last long. A man stripped of his stolen capital and his false pride is a very dangerous animal. The heavy glass doors of the executive suite elevator chimed in the distance. Quick, erratic footsteps pounded against the polished hardwood floors of the outer hallway, moving with frantic, unhinged aggression, heading straight toward my door. The heavy glass door to my executive suite did not just open. It rebounded off the metal doorstop with a sharp, echoing crack. Liam stood in the threshold, looking nothing like the polished wealth manager who had kissed my forehead hours earlier. His custom-tailored suit jacket was unbuttoned and wrinkled. Dark patches of sweat stained the collar of his pale blue dress shirt. His breathing was ragged, loud enough to disrupt the quiet, sterile space of the corporate floor. My assistant stood behind him in the hallway, her hand hovering over the security panic button on her desk. I offered her a curt, subtle nod, signaling her to step back and close the door. The glass barrier clicked shut, sealing us inside the soundproof room. Liam closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. He did not sit in the leather client chairs opposite my desk. He leaned forward, planting both of his hands flat against the cool glass surface, bringing his flushed face inches from mine. He smelled of premium country club bourbon winter sweat and raw, unfiltered terror. "What did you do?" He hissed his voice, a low, gravelly rasp. My cards declined at the simulator. My payroll manager just called me in tears because every single direct deposit bounced. The bank told me a judicial hold was executed an hour ago. You filed an ex parte injunction. I kept my posture relaxed, leaning back into my ergonomic chair. I folded my hands together, resting them on my lap. "I filed a protective order, Liam," I replied, my tone identical to the one I used during board meetings. "You initiated an unauthorized wire transfer at 3 a.m, draining our joint savings. The courts view that as a malicious dissipation of assets." The judge agreed with my attorney. "Your liquidity is frozen until we untangle the ledgers." I did not mention the forged home equity line of credit. I kept the forgery concealed, an ace held tight against my chest. Let him think this was a standard domestic dispute over a drained savings account. He stared at me, his eyes darting across my calm features. He expected to find a weeping, betrayed wife. Finding a stone-cold corporate auditor pushed him over the psychological edge. The charming facade shattered into pieces, revealing the desperate, cornered fraudster hiding underneath. "You think you are so smart," he spat, drops of saliva landing on the pristine glass desk. "You think you can just freeze my firm and walk away clean? You forgot how this town works, Kat. Corporate restructuring requires an impeccable reputation. If your board of directors questions your moral integrity, you lose your license. You lose your $450,000 salary." I tilted my head, feigning mild curiosity. "And how do you plan to compromise my integrity, Liam?" He stood up straight, brushing a shaking hand through his disheveled hair. He paced the length of the office, his expensive leather shoes squeaking against the polished floor. "I am going to call your chief executive officer," he said, a nasty, venomous smirk pulling at the corners of his mouth. "I am going to tell him the pressure of your job finally broke you. I will say you have been quietly self-medicating for 2 years. I will provide a detailed, fabricated account of finding empty prescription pill bottles hidden in the lining of your winter coats." He stopped pacing and turned back to face me, reveling in his perceived leverage. "My mother already planted the seed in the country club forum. She told everyone you were unstable and erratic. When I corroborate her story with the tearful husband routine, your board will believe me. They will force you into mandatory rehabilitation pending an independent investigation. Your career will be over by Monday morning." The threat hung in the air, a vile, calculated attempt at character assassination. In the corporate compliance sector, an allegation of substance abuse triggers an immediate suspension. Even if I passed a medical screening, the shadow of the rumor would permanently destroy my credibility. Liam was executing a textbook extortion plot. He took a step closer to the desk, his confidence returning. "So here is the new arrangement," he dictated, pointing a finger at my chest. "You are going to call your attack dog attorney. You are going to lift the injunction and unfreeze my accounts immediately. Then you are going to draft a quitclaim deed, transferring 100% of the marital home into my sole possession. You do all of this, or I obliterate your professional life." It was time to deliver the performance of a lifetime. I needed to feed his arrogance. I let my shoulders slump forward, releasing the rigid posture I had maintained since Sunday dinner. I lowered my gaze, staring at the keyboard on my desk. I forced my breathing to become shallow and rapid. I let my lower lip tremble. I brought my hands up to my face, covering my eyes, as a dry, ragged sob tore from my throat. "Please," I whispered, my voice shaking with perfectly manufactured terror. "Liam, please do not do this. I worked so hard for my director title. If you call the board, they will fire me. I will lose everything." He chuckled, a dark, satisfied sound that bounced off the glass walls. "That depends entirely on your next move, Kat. Make the right choice." I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing a single tear to escape and slide down my cheek. I looked up at him through wet lashes, portraying absolute defeat. "I need time," I choked out, wrapping my arms around my torso as if trying to hold myself together. "I cannot just unfreeze federal holds in 5 minutes. The banks require paperwork. I need 24 hours to process the withdrawal and call Marcus off. Please, just give me 24 hours. Liam stood over me, soaking in the sight of my perceived surrender. The panic that brought him into the office was replaced by a smug, toxic superiority. He reached out and patted my shoulder, a gesture of mock comfort that made my skin crawl. "You have until this exact time tomorrow," he said, his tone brisk and commanding. "Do not try anything stupid. The chief executive is just one phone call away." He turned on his heel and walked out of the office. I listened to his heavy footsteps fade down the carpeted hallway. The elevator chimed, and he was gone. The moment the glass door clicked shut, the tears stopped. My breathing leveled out into a slow, measured rhythm. I straightened my spine, rolling my shoulders back against the leather chair. The facade of the broken, terrified wife evaporated. I reached forward and picked up my cell phone, which had been sitting face down on the glass desk the entire time. The screen was illuminated, displaying a bright red banner indicating an active voice memo recording session. I tapped the screen, stopping the recording and saving the audio file to an encrypted cloud drive. The microphone on my device was highly sensitive, designed for capturing large boardroom meetings. It had picked up every single decibel of Liam's unhinged rant. He explicitly outlined a plot to blackmail me, using fabricated claims of substance abuse, tying the threat directly to a demand for real estate and the lifting of a judicial injunction. He had just committed a federal felony, captured with crystal clear audio fidelity. He thought he was holding a gun to my career, but he had just handed me the rope to hang him. Liam was contained, confident that he had won the war. He believed he was going to walk away with the sprawling Appalachian estate and his unblemished reputation. But I had a very different plan for the marital home, and an even darker plan for the true architect of this corrupt family tree. While Liam waited for his 24-hour deadline to expire, I turned my attention to the patriarch. Richard thought his Appalachian real estate empire was an impenetrable fortress. He had no idea his entire legacy was resting in the palm of my hand. The audio file finished uploading to my encrypted cloud drive. A small green checkmark appeared on the monitor, signaling that Liam felony extortion was safely locked away in a secure offshore server. I closed the application and leaned back in my chair. The second head of the Roberts Hydra was severed. Jessica was sitting in a police precinct, and my husband was a dead man walking. But a toxic root system will simply grow new branches if you do not poison the soil. The soil of this particular dynasty was managed by Richard. I turned my chair to face the floor-to-ceiling windows. The snow had stopped falling over Morgantown, leaving the Appalachian hills blanketed in a deceptive, pristine white. Looking at the rugged terrain, my thoughts drifted away from the sterile corporate tower and traveled back to my childhood. My late father was a coal mine auditor. He was a man carved from the very mountains Richard exploited. My dad did not wear custom Italian suits or drink expensive scotch at the country club. He wore steel-toed boots and possessed hands permanently stained with a faint trace of black dust. But his mind was a steel trap. He spent his life descending into the dark, claustrophobic shafts of the coal mines, verifying safety logs, and exposing the fraudulent accounting of greedy energy barons. I remember sitting at our worn kitchen table when I was 12 years old, watching him review a stack of falsified ledgers. He looked up at me, his eyes sharp and serious. "Kat," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble, "men in expensive suits will always try to sell you a bridge. They will talk about the beautiful view and the smooth pavement, but you never buy a bridge based on the view. Always check the pilings, because a corrupt man will build a kingdom on rotten wood, and he will smile right up until the moment it collapses. Richard was the exact type of man my father warned me about. For 3 decades, my father-in-law paraded around West Virginia as a self-made titan of commercial real estate. He hosted charity galas, dictated local zoning policies, and treated the working-class residents of this state like peasants, existing solely to service his needs. He viewed my career as a cute temporary distraction for a woman whose actual purpose was to breed heirs for his pristine lineage. He projected an image of unshakable wealth. But I checked his pilings. 3 years ago, the Appalachian commercial real estate market experienced a severe contraction. Several of Richard's largest retail tenants filed for bankruptcy, breaking their leases and leaving his strip malls vacant. Because Richard operated on vanity rather than sound financial principles, he was dangerously over-leveraged. He had used his properties as collateral to fund his lavish lifestyle. When the rental income dried up, the banks came calling. Richard was days away from a total, humiliating financial ruin. His creditors were preparing to foreclose on his entire portfolio. The Roberts family would have lost their sprawling estate, their country club memberships, and their precious social standing. At the time, I still believed in my marriage. I believed we were a family. I knew Liam would be crushed by the public disgrace, and I knew Richard possessed a pride so rigid it would break him before he ever accepted charity from a daughter-in-law he viewed as beneath his social class. So I used my corporate bonuses and my pristine credit to save his legacy in secret. But I did not simply write a check. I orchestrated a phantom buyout. If I had purchased his distressed debt through a local West Virginia bank, Richard, good old boy network of attorneys, would have traced the transaction back to me within a week. They would have scoured the county registry and uncovered the identity of the buyer. I needed a fortress they could not breach. I reached out to my former university mentor, a brilliant old money financier named William Sterling, who operated a highly discreet wealth management firm in Boston. William understood the delicate nature of my request. He established a blind, limited liability company registered in Delaware, layered beneath 2 additional corporate entities. Through this impenetrable Boston shell company, I purchased Richard's entire debt portfolio at a steep discount from his panicked lenders. I became the sole anonymous creditor holding the paper on his existence. I restructured his payments, lowering the interest rates to a manageable crawl, giving him the breathing room he needed to survive. For 36 months, Richard praised his mysterious corporate savior. He boasted to his country club friends about his keen negotiation skills, claiming he had outsmarted the banks and secured a miracle restructuring deal. He assumed the corporate gods had smiled upon his legacy. He had no idea he was indentured to the woman pouring his coffee at Sunday dinner. He repaid my silent salvation by conspiring to steal my career and my home. He approved the plan to turn me into a captive nanny for his daughter. He sent the text message demanding I be handled. The time for silent charity was over. I turned back to my desk and opened a new browser tab. I typed in the highly secure web address for William Sterling firm. The portal required dual-factor authentication and a biometric scan. Once inside, I navigated to the administrative dashboard of my blind holding company. The digital ledger displayed the current balance of Richard commercial loans, $5.5 million. It was a staggering sum, secured by every single piece of property the Roberts family owned. I clicked the legal transfer tab. For 3 years, that anonymous entity shielded them from public scrutiny. I initiated the dissolution of the corporate veil. I executed the electronic transfer deeds, migrating the entire $5.5 million debt portfolio out of the Boston Shell Company and directly into my personal name, Catherine Roberts. The legal implications were monumental. I was no longer a silent benefactor hiding in the shadows. The shift in ownership would hit the banking registries within hours. I became his direct, undeniable master. But simply owning the debt was not enough. I needed the authority to drop the hammer immediately. Commercial loans are bound by strict operational covenants. Borrowers must maintain specific cash reserves, provide quarterly financial audits, and seek explicit permission before taking on additional liabilities. I opened Richard's recent compliance filings. Arrogance breeds laziness. Because he believed his anonymous creditor was a distant, disinterested corporate entity, he had grown incredibly sloppy with his bookkeeping. He treated the restructured loan like a blank check. My eyes scanned the digital spreadsheets, cross-referencing his reported income against his actual bank balances. The forensic auditor inside me found the discrepancies in less than 10 minutes. Richard had committed 3 distinct, undeniable covenant breaches. He had failed to maintain the required liquid cash reserves for 2 consecutive quarters. He had missed his annual reporting deadline by 40 days. And, most damning of all, he had taken out a secondary, unauthorized loan against one of his commercial plazas to purchase a new luxury yacht for himself. I smiled, a cool satisfaction spreading through my chest. According to the standard acceleration clauses embedded in his contract, a single covenant breach grants the creditor the right to issue a warning. 3 breaches grant the creditor the unilateral authority to call the entire loan due in full, effective immediately. I held the kill switch. I possessed the legal right to demand a lump sum payment of $5.5 million within 24 hours. When he inevitably failed to produce the cash, I could seize his properties, liquidate his assets, and bankrupt him in a matter of days. The patriarch was dead. He just did not know it yet. I logged out of the Boston portal and closed the browser. The triad of the Roberts family was now perfectly cornered. Jessica was facing a judge. Richard was unknowingly bankrupt. There was only one loose end left to tie before the grand finale. Liam still believed he held the ultimate leverage over me. He still thought his extortion threat secured his safety. He demanded I transfer the sprawling Appalachian marital home into his name, assuming the house was his ultimate prize and the ultimate symbol of his dominance over me. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Marcus. The gruff attorney answered on the first ring. "The injunction is live," Marcus stated. "His accounts are frozen solid." "Excellent," I replied. "Call his attorney. Tell him I am terrified. Tell him I am ready to negotiate a preliminary divorce settlement this afternoon." "He wants the house, Marcus." "I want you to give it to him. Do not put up a fight. Hand him the keys and let him think he won." Marcus paused, the confusion evident in his silence. "You want to surrender the estate?" "I am not surrendering anything," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. "I am handing him an anchor. Set the meeting." I ended the call. The board was set. The pieces were moving into their final positions. It was time to give my husband exactly what he asked for, wrapped in a bow made of federal wire fraud. The conference room inside Marcus Law Firm smelled of expensive leather polish and cold filtered coffee. The space was designed to intimidate, featuring a massive polished oak table and sweeping views of the Morgantown skyline. The afternoon light cast long gray shadows across the floorboards. I sat next to Marcus, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I wore a conservative, understated gray suit and kept my posture rigid. I was playing the role of a terrified, cornered woman desperate to save her professional life. Across the table sat Liam and his attorney. Liam looked entirely revitalized. The panic that had driven him to storm my office hours earlier had vanished, replaced by an insufferable, smug arrogance. He had smoothed the wrinkles from his tailored jacket and combed his hair back into place. His mother Beatrice sat directly behind him in one of the gallery chairs. She wore a tailored wool coat and a pearl necklace, her chin tilted upward in an expression of haughty triumph. She had insisted on attending to witness my public humiliation. Liam Lawyer, a slick, aggressive junior partner, cleared his throat and opened a thick leather binder. "Let us be pragmatic," the lawyer began, his tone dripping with false diplomacy. "My client has experienced significant emotional distress due to the sudden and frankly malicious freezing of his business accounts. However, in the interest of a swift resolution and keeping certain allegations out of the public eye, he is willing to offer a generous compromise. The implicit threat hung in the air. Keeping certain allegations out of the public eye was a direct reference to his extortion plot. He was reminding me that he still held the fabricated substance abuse rumors over my head. Liam leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished oak, his eyes locked onto mine, shining with a toxic superiority. Here are my terms, Kat. We lift the injunction today. You walk away with your corporate salary and your precious career. I keep the primary marital estate, including the 3 acres and all interior furnishings. You sign the quitclaim deed right now, transferring 100% of the property into my sole name. In exchange, I do not make that phone call to your chief executive officer. We part ways quietly. It was his ultimate demand. The sprawling Appalachian estate was not just a piece of real estate to Liam. It was a status symbol. It was the physical manifestation of the wealth he pretended to possess. Keeping the house proved to his country club peers that he was the dominant force in our marriage, and that he had successfully discarded a problematic wife while keeping the spoils. Marcus shifted in his chair, putting on a brief, rehearsed show of resistance. The primary residence holds significant equity, he countered smoothly. Transferring the deed entirely to your client without financial compensation is highly irregular. Liam smirked. Do you want to discuss irregularity, Marcus? Or do you want to advise your client to take the deal before my mother starts calling the corporate board members she knows personally? Beatrice offered a cold, venomous smile from the gallery. She genuinely believed her social maneuvering had brought me to my knees. She thought her Facebook posts and country club gossip had broken my spirit. I looked at Marcus and offered a slow, deliberate nod. I let my shoulders sag, adopting a defeated posture. It is fine, Marcus, I whispered, ensuring my voice sounded hollow and fragile. Let him have the house. I just want this over. I cannot risk my career. Liam let out a short, triumphant laugh. His lawyer slid the quitclaim deed across the polished oak table, placing a heavy brass pen next to it. The dramatic irony filling the room was intoxicating. Liam and Beatrice were practically vibrating with joy. They believed they had outsmarted a senior corporate auditor. They thought they were walking away with a multi-million-dollar property, free and clear. They had no idea they were sitting at a table demanding ownership of a live grenade. I picked up the brass pen. I did not hesitate. I did not shed a tear. I signed my name on the designated line with smooth, practiced precision. I transferred my entire legal interest in the property directly to Liam Roberts. Liam attorney quickly snatched the document back, inspecting the signature with a satisfied nod. Excellent. My client accepts the transfer. The property is now his sole responsibility. We consider this matter preliminarily settled. I expect the judicial hold on his accounts to be lifted by the end of the business day. Marcus closed his legal pad. The hold will be lifted according to standard judicial procedures, he replied cryptically. Liam stood up, buttoning his tailored jacket. He looked down at me, savoring his perceived victory. You should pack your things tonight, Kat. I want you out of my house by tomorrow morning. I did not look up. I simply nodded, keeping my hands folded in my lap until Liam, his lawyer, and a gloating Beatrice walked out of the conference room. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them. The moment they were gone, the facade dropped. I sat up straight, the tension leaving my body. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair and let out a low whistle. You just handed him a $3 million estate without a fight. I hope you know exactly what you are doing, Catherine. I know exactly what I did, Marcus, I replied, standing up and smoothing my skirt. The brilliant trap of the quitclaim deed is in the fine print of property law. By demanding sole ownership of the estate and aggressively pushing the transfer through the preliminary settlement, Liam legally assumed sole responsibility for every single financial encumbrance attached to that property. He thought he was winning a house filled with equity. He forgot that 6 months ago, he forged my signature to open a $400,000 home equity line of credit. He had systematically drained that line of credit to fund his Ponzi scheme and prop up his father-failing commercial plazas. The house was entirely underwater. The primary mortgage combined with the massive maxed-out secondary lien meant the property held absolutely zero positive equity. Liam had just fought tooth and nail to inherit a mountain of toxic debt. By taking my name off the deed, he legally absorbed the entire financial burden. If the payments defaulted, his credit would be destroyed, not mine. But the forged debt was only the first layer of the Trojan horse. The second layer was far more devastating, and it involved the federal government. When I uncovered Liam Ponzi's scheme on my corporate terminal, I did not just freeze his local bank accounts. I utilized the whistleblower portal to submit a highly detailed, undeniable dossier to the Securities and Exchange Commission, flagging his boutique wealth management firm for systemic fraud and the embezzlement of client retirement funds. Federal regulators move with terrifying efficiency when presented with concrete evidence of a Ponzi scheme. They trace the stolen capital to its final destination, and Liam had used a significant portion of those stolen retirement funds to pay the property taxes and mortgage premiums on the very house he just demanded. The SEC was already drafting a federal lien against the estate. They were preparing to seize the property as collateral to reimburse the defrauded investors. Liam did not win a sprawling Appalachian estate. He won a sinking ship. When he attempted to sell the house to cover his looming legal fees, he would discover the federal lien blocking the sale. He would realize that the $400,000 forged debt was now entirely his problem. He would understand that I had handed him the instrument of his own financial execution, wrapped in a neat legal bow. I walked out of Marcus' law firm and stepped into the crisp winter air. The sun was setting over Morgantown, casting a deep, bruised purple hue across the sky. The preliminary battles were over. I had neutralized Jessica Bankrupt Richard in secret and handed Liam his own poison. But the Roberts family still believed they had won. They were heading home to celebrate. They were preparing to attend the annual West Virginia Heritage Gala tonight, intending to parade around the ballroom and revel in my supposed defeat. They thought they had successfully banished me from their elite kingdom. They had no idea I was bringing a match to their paper castle. It was time to go home, shed the conservative gray suit, and prepare for the final public execution. The biting Appalachian wind whipped around the edges of my sleek black town car as it navigated the winding, ice-slicked road toward the Morgantown Country Club. A brutal winter storm had descended upon the valley, an unforgiving blizzard that mirrored the impending devastation I was about to unleash. Thick sheets of snow battered the windshield, obscuring the ancient pine trees and isolating the sprawling estate from the outside world. The weather had effectively trapped West Virginia elite within the gilded walls of the club, ensuring I possessed a captive audience. Inside the vehicle, the climate control hummed a steady, quiet rhythm. I sat in the back seat feeling a profound, terrifying calm. The conservative gray suit I wore during the fake settlement negotiation was gone, discarded along with the persona of the broken, terrified wife. I had chosen my armor for the evening with surgical intent. I wore a floor-length liquid silk gown in a shade of deep, unapologetic crimson. The fabric moved like dark fire, featuring a high-structured neckline that contradicted a daring, plunging back. It was not a dress designed for a compliant daughter-in-law hoping to blend into the muted navy and pale champagne wallpaper of a high society event. It was a garment engineered to stop conversations, draw stares, and command the absolute center of a crowded room. My dark hair was pinned into a sleek structural twist, and my makeup was sharp and flawless. I did not look like a victim of financial extortion or a casualty of a malicious social smear campaign. I looked like an executioner stepping up to the block. The driver brought the car to a smooth halt beneath the grand portico of the country club. The towering white pillars and historic brick facade loomed ahead, a fortress of old money and inherited privilege. For generations, the Roberts family used this specific building as their royal court. Deals were brokered in the cigar lounges, reputations were destroyed over afternoon tea, and the annual West Virginia Heritage Gala served as their coronation. Tonight, I was crashing the ceremony. A valet in a heavy wool coat opened my door. The freezing wind bit at my bare arms, but I did not shiver. I stepped out of the vehicle, my black stiletto heels snapping against the frozen concrete with undeniable authority. I bypassed the coat check and walked directly toward the heavy mahogany double doors leading into the grand ballroom. A wave of heated air rushed over me as the doors swung inward, carrying the rich scent of roasted prime rib, expensive perfume, and fresh white lilies. A 12-piece jazz orchestra occupied a raised bandstand at the far end of the room, playing a lively brass tune that floated above the din of clinking crystal and polite laughter. The ballroom was a sea of predictable conformity. The men wore identical tailored black tuxedos. The women adhered to the unspoken dress code of wealthy subtlety, draped in safe, neutral tones. My sudden appearance in the arched doorway was a visual shockwave. The brilliant red silk broke the monotony like a siren flashing in a dark tunnel. The social ecosystem reacted instantly. The conversations nearest to the entrance faltered. Heads turned. Eyes widened in undisguised shock. Beatrice's carefully orchestrated Facebook campaign had painted a very specific picture of me. The Morgantown elite expected to see a hollowed-out, emotionally unstable woman trembling in isolation, mourning the impending loss of her marriage and career. They expected me to be hiding in shame. Instead, they saw an apex predator. I kept my chin parallel to the floor, my shoulders pulled back, and my gaze locked straight ahead. I did not look for friendly faces, because I knew there were none in this room. I glided past tables covered in crisp white linen and towering floral centerpieces. A hushed, scandalized whisper began to ripple through the crowd, traveling faster than the music. Women leaned behind their sequined clutch purses to mutter to their husbands. Men lowered their scotch glasses, staring in bewildered fascination. I scanned the expansive room, locating the head table, positioned near the center of the polished oak dance floor. Beatrice sat in the middle, holding court. She wore a heavy beaded gown and her signature dark sapphire. She was radiating a smug, untouchable satisfaction, likely receiving congratulations from her peers on successfully excising the problematic daughter-in-law from their pristine bloodline. Richard sat beside her, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon, laughing at a joke told by a neighboring real estate developer. Liam was standing near the bar, looking incredibly pleased with himself, projecting the aura of a man who had just won a sprawling estate and secured his future. Jessica was conspicuously absent. Her designated chair remained empty. The Morgantown elite likely assumed she was resting at home with her newborn. They had no idea she was currently sitting in a sterile interrogation room at the county precinct, stripped of her designer clothing and facing felony child abandonment charges, while her $2.2 million influencer contract burned to ash. Beatrice turned her head to identify the source of the sudden, unnatural drop in volume across the ballroom. Her gaze landed on the crimson dress. The transformation of her face was a masterpiece of spontaneous terror. Her polite, aristocratic smile vanished instantly. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a pale, sickly gray under the bright crystal chandeliers. Her manicured fingers gripped the edge of the table so tightly, her knuckles turned bone white. She recognized the posture. She realized in a fraction of a second that the broken woman she thought she had caged was a dangerous illusion. Richard followed her line of sight. He dropped his fork onto his china plate with a loud, sharp clatter. He stood up his chair, scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. Beatrice began frantically waving her hand, gesturing wildly toward a pair of private security guards stationed near the kitchen swinging doors. She mouthed desperate commands, demanding they intercept me before I could reach the center of the room. Two men in dark suits stepped forward, their expressions caught between professional duty and deep confusion. They moved to block my path, forming a human wall between me and the dance floor. I did not slow my pace. I walked directly up to the taller guard, stopping merely inches from his chest. He raised a hand, preparing to ask me to leave the premises. I looked him dead in the eye, my expression forged from pure ice. "I am a vested, dues-paying member of this institution," I said, keeping my voice low but laced with lethal, unyielding authority. "If you place a single finger on this silk dress, my attorneys will ensure you spend the next decade buried in civil litigation. Step aside." In the affluent bubbles of Appalachia, private security personnel are trained to handle unruly drunks and trespassing teenagers. They are not equipped to physically manhandle a confident, wealthy woman threatening high-stakes legal ruin. The guard hesitated. His eyes darted toward Beatrice, then back to my unblinking stare. He made a calculated choice to preserve his own livelihood. He lowered his hand and took a subtle step to the right, clearing my path. I walked past him without a second glance. I did not head toward the Roberts family table. I altered my trajectory and walked directly toward the raised bandstand. The jazz musicians noticed my approach. The trumpet player lowered his instrument first. The upright bass slowed to a clumsy halt. One by one, the orchestra ceased playing. The lively tune died a disjointed death, plunging the ballroom into a profound, suffocating silence. Hundreds of wealthy guests held their collective breath, watching a scene unfold that defied every rule of their polite society. I climbed the 3 carpeted steps to the stage. I walked to the center of the platform and wrapped my hand around the chrome stem of the microphone stand. I lifted the microphone from its cradle. The feedback crackled briefly through the overhead speakers, a sharp electronic whine that commanded the undivided attention of every single person in the building. I looked out over the sea of upturned faces. I held the power in the room, a cold and piercing dominance that required no shouting. I saw the prominent judges, the venture capitalists, and the legacy heirs. I saw the people who had judged me, whispered about me, and tried to isolate me on behalf of a family built entirely on lies. Then a sudden movement near the back bar shattered the stillness. Liam burst through the crowd. The smug satisfaction he wore moments ago had mutated into raw, unhinged panic. He shoved a waiter aside, sending a tray of champagne flutes crashing to the floor. The sound of breaking glass echoed sharply. He marched down the center aisle, closing the distance toward the stage with heavy, furious strides. The execution was commencing, and the primary target was rushing the block. The frantic pounding of leather shoes against the polished oak dance floor signaled the end of my husband. Liam tore through the crowd of wealthy onlookers, his face a mottled mask of purple fury and raw panic. He shoved past a cluster of local politicians, his tailored tuxedo jacket flapping open his chest, heaving with ragged breaths. He bounded up the 3 carpeted steps of the bandstand, reaching out with a trembling, desperate hand to snatch the chrome microphone stand away from my grip. I did not flinch. I did not step backward in fear. I simply pivoted on my stiletto heel, shifting my weight and pulling the microphone smoothly out of his trajectory. The heavy crimson silk of my gown swirled around my ankles as I sidestepped his advance. Fueled by adrenaline and expensive country club bourbon, Liam possessed zero physical control. His momentum carried him forward into empty space. His slick dress shoes lost traction on the slick wooden platform. He stumbled, clumsily, crashing hard into the brass section of the jazz orchestra. A heavy music stand toppled over, sending a brass cymbal clattering to the floor with a harsh metallic clang that pierced the silent ballroom. A collective, horrified gasp rose from the Appalachian elite. They were witnessing a prominent investment banker unravel into a chaotic, pathetic mess. Liam scrambled to his hands and knees, his breath catching in his throat. "Get down from there," he snarled, his voice a low, gravelly rasp meant only for my ears. "Put that down right now, Kat. I swear I will end you." I ignored him. I reached into the silk pocket of my evening clutch and retrieved my cell phone. The screen cast a pale glow across my face in the dim stage lighting. I unlocked the device with a single touch, pulled up the encrypted audio file, and pressed the speaker directly against the grill of the microphone. I tapped play. The digital recording bypassed the ambient noise of the room, feeding straight into the professional-grade sound system. Liam recorded voice blasted through the amplifiers, filling every corner of the vast, vaulted ballroom. The acoustics of the country club magnified the cruel, arrogant cadence of his tone. The audio fidelity was pristine, picking up the subtle edge of venom he reserved only for me behind closed doors. "I am going to call your chief executive officer," the recorded voice echoed, bouncing off the historic brick walls. "I will say you have been quietly self-medicating for 2 years. I will provide a detailed, fabricated account of finding empty prescription pill bottles hidden in the lining of your winter coats." The audience sat paralyzed. Men in custom tuxedos lowered their drinks. Women in beaded gowns covered their mouths in genuine shock. They were listening to a man they trusted outline a calculated felony extortion plot against his own wife. But the recording pressed forward, unforgiving and sharp, shifting from marital blackmail to a full confession of federal crimes. "You are going to unfreeze my accounts immediately," the audio Liam demanded. "The offshore consulting fees are tied up. The principal from the Henderson Advanced Retirement Portfolios is sitting in the Milan Ventures shell company. If the regulators audit the firm on Friday, they will see the missing capital. I need your salary to cover the gap." The audio cut out, leaving a heavy, suffocating stillness in its wake. I scanned the tables below. I saw Mr. Henderson, a retired vascular surgeon, and several prominent venture capitalists sitting in stunned, pale horror. These were the exact men Liam relied upon for investment capital and social validation. The realization washed over their faces in real time. They understood the terminology. Liam had just openly admitted on tape that he funneled their stolen life savings into his sister shell company. He proved his boutique wealth management firm was nothing more than a hollow Ponzi scheme. Liam remained on the floor of the bandstand. The fight drained out of his body. The color vanished from his flushed face, leaving him a sickly, chalky white under the harsh glare of the stage lights. He stared at the speakers mounted on the walls as if they were venomous serpents. He looked out at the audience, searching for a single sympathetic face among his peers, but he found none. The people he spent his entire life trying to impress were looking at him with unmasked disgust. He sank onto his heels, his shoulders collapsing inward. The predator was dead. I tapped the screen of my phone, returning the device to my clutch. The execution of my husband was complete. His firm would face a mass exodus of clients by morning, followed swiftly by investigations from the Securities and Exchange Commission. But he was only a single branch of a toxic tree. The root system sat right in the center of the room. I adjusted my grip on the microphone and turned my attention to the head table. Richard was gripping the edge of the linen-covered table, his jaw clenched tight. He looked at his son with an expression of profound betrayal, realizing the golden boy had just destroyed their social standing permanently. Richard assumed his own secrets were safe. He assumed the commercial wealth he paraded around this country club protected him from any real consequence. "Richard," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear over the silent crowd. The sudden use of his first name, devoid of any familial respect, made him flinch. "You spent the last decade boasting about the unshakable foundation of your real estate portfolio. You told your friends you were a self-made king." Richard lifted his chin, attempting to project a hollow bravery, but a slight tremor in his hands betrayed his rising panic. "What you failed to mention to your peers," I continued, pausing for a fraction of a second to let the tension stretch, "is that 3 years ago, your banks prepared to foreclose on your entire operation. You were 30 days away from total bankruptcy. A private Boston holding company stepped in at the final hour, purchasing your distressed debt and saving your pride. You assumed you were just lucky." I watched the gears turn in his mind. The arrogant titan of industry was struggling to connect the dots. The timeline I presented perfectly aligned with the exact moment he almost lost everything. "I am a senior compliance director," I stated, dropping the final piece of the puzzle into place. "I do not just manage spreadsheets. I locate toxic assets and dictate the terms of their survival. That anonymous Boston holding company belongs to me. I used my own capital to purchase your debt. For 36 months, I was the sole creditor keeping this family afloat. The revelation struck the ballroom like a physical blow. The murmurs erupted into outright astonishment. The elite guests realized the towering Roberts dynasty was nothing more than a hollow illusion, propped up by the charity of the woman they had spent the week slandering. "I protected your legacy because I believed we were a family," I said. "But yesterday, you conspired with your son to steal my career and trap me in my own home to serve your daughter vanity project. You repaid my salvation with treachery. Therefore, I am officially lifting the shield." Richard stopped breathing. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. "This morning, I transferred the holding company assets into my direct personal name," I announced. "I audited your recent ledgers. You failed to maintain liquid cash reserves, and you took out an unauthorized loan to purchase a luxury yacht. Due to these 3 covenant breaches, I am exercising my legal right to call the entire $5.5 million loan balance due immediately." The bourbon glass slipped from Richard's trembling fingers. It shattered against the edge of the table, sending a spray of amber liquid across the white linen. He reached a shaking hand up to his chest, clutching the lapel of his tuxedo, as a ragged gasp tore from his throat. Beatrice buried her face in her hands, weeping openly, her social crown turning to ash. I possess the legal authority to seize his properties by morning, and with Liam's stolen capital frozen, Richard had zero liquidity to save himself. I bankrupt the patriarch on the spot. I turned my gaze back down to Liam, who was still kneeling on the stage, staring at me with hollow, defeated eyes. "One last thing, Liam," I whispered into the microphone, ensuring the entire room heard the final twist of the blade. "You fought so hard during the settlement meeting today to keep the Appalachian estate. You demanded the house to prove your dominance." He blinked, a fresh wave of confusion piercing his despair. "I gladly signed the quitclaim deed transferring 100% of the property into your name," I explained, offering a cool, predatory smile. "But I forgot to mention that 6 months ago, you forged my signature to open a $400,000 home equity line of credit against that property. By demanding sole ownership, you legally assumed the entirety of that toxic, fraudulent debt. Furthermore, because you used stolen retirement funds to pay the property taxes, the federal regulators are already seizing the estate. The SEC drafted a federal lien this afternoon." I stepped closer to him, looking down at the broken man who thought he could use my life as a stepping stone. "I did not give you a mansion, Liam. I gave you an anchor, and you are going to drown." I placed the microphone back onto the stand. The silence of the remaining guests spoke volumes. They understood the new hierarchy. I turned around and descended the 3 carpeted steps, moving with smooth, deliberate grace. The crowd parted instantly, creating a wide and clear aisle for my departure. No one dared to speak. No one offered a false pleasantry. They simply watched as the architect of this beautiful destruction glided past their tables, leaving the Roberts family to choke on the fires they set themselves. The brutal, suffocating Appalachian winter has finally surrendered to a vibrant, breathing spring. I am sitting on the wraparound cedar porch of a beautiful Blue Ridge mountain cabin. The air smells of damp earth, blooming dogwood trees, and pure freedom. I hold a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee, watching the morning mist burn off the lush green canopy rolling across the endless valley. I purchased this sanctuary 3 months ago. I did not need a wealthy co-signer. I did not need to leverage a hidden asset or forge a signature. I bought it entirely with my own, clean, meticulously documented corporate income. There are no vaulted ceilings echoing with passive-aggressive demands. There are no mahogany dining tables where my life is casually offered up as a sacrifice to appease a fragile ego. There is only the profound, unshakable peace of a life entirely owned and fiercely defended. The fallout from the Heritage Gala was swift, surgical, and permanent. When an arrogant dynasty is built on stolen capital and reckless gravity does the heavy lifting for you. Richard experienced the unforgiving reality of a called loan. Because his liquid assets were either frozen by federal regulators or simply non-existent, he defaulted instantly. The foreclosure process was a public, humiliating spectacle. The bank auctioned off his legacy commercial properties in the county courthouse lobby, selling his prized real estate empire for pennies on the dollar to the very competitors he used to mock at the country club. Without the rental income to sustain their lavish lifestyle, Richard and Beatrice were forced to vacate their sprawling Morgantown estate in the dead of winter. The country club quietly revoked their membership, citing a violation of the moral conduct bylaws. The same elite peers who once attended their lavish dinner parties and nodded along to their gossip now cross the street to avoid them. Beatrice spends her days in a cramped, rented townhome situated next to a noisy intersection. She sits in silence, realizing that her coveted social crown was funded by the daughter-in-law she tried to destroy. Her phone never rings. Jessica fell the hardest. The local authorities intercepted her at the private charter terminal just as she was handing her designer luggage to a pilot. She did not make it to the sponsored ski lodge in Aspen to drink champagne. She spent that weekend sitting in a sterile, concrete holding cell. Facing felony child abandonment charges and drowning in civil lawsuits from the Organic Wellness brand demanding the return of their initial payments, she accepted a strict plea deal offered by the district attorney to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. Today, the former aspiring lifestyle influencer wears a different kind of uniform. Twice a week, Jessica puts on a bright neon orange safety vest and fulfills her 500 hours of court-mandated community service. She walks the muddy, slush-filled shoulder of the interstate highway, picking up discarded fast food wrappers and plastic bottles with a metal grabber. Semi-trucks roar past her, kicking up dust and exhaust. Her manicured nails are ruined. Her designer clothes are replaced by heavy, state-issued work boots. Stripped of her digital filters, her fake followers, and her vanity, she is finally experiencing the actual manual labor she spent her entire life avoiding. As for little Finn, the state foster system intervened with exceptional care. Investigators located a grounded, compassionate cousin on his biological father's side of the family. The cousin lives in a quiet, modest suburb far away from the toxic vanity of the Morgantown elite. Finn is surrounded by genuine affection rather than cold calculation. He is safe from the ruthless machine that tried to turn his infancy into a lucrative marketing prop. He will grow up knowing his worth is not tied to a sponsorship deal. And then there is Liam. My former husband no longer wears custom Italian suits or drives a leased luxury vehicle. The Securities and Exchange Commission, armed with the pristine audio recording and the undeniable financial ledgers I provided, dismantled his boutique wealth management firm piece by piece. His professional licenses were permanently revoked. The federal lien I warned him about seized the underwater marital home, formally evicting him just weeks after he fought so desperately to claim it in the divorce settlement. Today, Liam resides in a tiny, unadorned, one-bedroom apartment on the industrial edge of town. He wears a bulky, state-issued ankle monitor strapped to his leg. The device blinks a steady red light in the dark, confining him to a strict curfew while he awaits his federal trial for wire fraud and embezzlement. The wealthy investors he once charmed on the golf course are now the primary witnesses testifying for the prosecution. He traded his pride for an illusion, and the illusion collapsed, leaving him with nothing but the impending reality of a federal prison cell. I take a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the warm ceramic against my palms. The profound peace settling over my life is not just the absence of conflict, it is the presence of hard-won freedom. I want to speak directly to anyone listening to this story right now. Perhaps you are sitting in your car on your morning commute, or hiding in your kitchen trying to find a single moment of quiet. Perhaps you are currently sharing a table with people who constantly diminish your achievements. From a young age, society conditions women to act as the perennial peacemakers. We are taught to soften our edges, lower our voices, and compromise our ambitions to maintain family harmony. We are told that being a good wife or a good daughter requires endless sacrifice. People wielding toxic entitlement will exploit that conditioning. They will weaponize your empathy. They will demand you hand over your hard-earned wealth, your career, and your sanity under the guise of familial duty. They demanded I give up my life to serve their vanity. Instead, I gave them the truth. I did not destroy the Roberts family. They handed me the gasoline, and I simply refused to extinguish the flame. You hold that exact same power. Never shrink yourself to fit a toxic mold. Never apologize for being the smartest person in the room. And never let anyone convince you that your success is a resource for them to harvest. Boundaries are not merely emotional preferences. They are legal. They are financial. They are the ironclad walls that protect your peace. If someone threatens your sanctuary, you do not owe them quiet compliance. You owe yourself fierce protection. Secure your assets. Document their behavior. Build your fortress so high that their manipulative tactics shatter against the stone. Thank you for walking through this journey with me. If my story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own strength, please hit the like button and subscribe to Revenge Order. I want to build a community of individuals who refuse to be silenced. Scroll down to the comments and share your own boundary-setting victories. Tell me about the moment you stopped protecting the people who hurt you. Your courage might be the exact spark someone else needs to finally walk out their own front door. Take a deep breath, hold your head high, and claim your space. Keep your receipts, keep your dignity, and hit subscribe.